Hello, lovely people. I wanted to show you the inside of this box because today we'll be talking about ported versus sealed enclosures. However, this little guy, I don't know what he's doing, so I think when he's gonna finish, we're gonna continue. Okay, you're done? You're done. Cool. So, ported versus sealed. Everybody's always saying that ported is for SPL, sealed is for SQ. Today we're going to see. What I have here is I have a subwoofer and I have an enclosure. So I did this enclosure quite a while ago. I made it sealed. However, I redid it as ported just to play around and just to see. So in today's video, we're going to take some objective measurements. So I'm already playing with the impedance graphs. So we're going to take impedance graphs. We're going to take frequency response graphs in room, like in my house where this subwoofer is, and then we're going to compare it how it looks like in the car as well compared to the room, because it is totally different. And I won't believe I will be able to take any meaningful measurements like literally outside, because subwoofer waves are so long that they're not going to propagate properly like outside. So I'm not going to even bother taking it outside. But this enclosure, so this enclosure is made of 25 mil, which is I believe an inch thick MDF all around, and I have a port. So this port is from cardboard, where you have like cardboard tubes for carpets and that kind of stuff. I just found one piece, it kind of looked good size. So this port is 10 centimeters across, I think. So that's what, 4 inches or something. It is a little bit too small, but it's the only way how I could fit it, because it's almost there. There is a little gap, like an inch, maybe an inch and a half gap between that wall and the port, so it could be able to breathe. It does have a few bracings, one over there, and obviously from that side, and I do have a few bracings for the actual box itself. So the way how I'm going to do this ported versus sealed is I'm not going to have two subwoofers. I'm not going to have two boxes. I'm going to have the same box, but I'm just going to cover the port. Hence, this little guy. Cat Bus, if you remember Totoro. My little one just loves that movie. So anyway, that's the port over there, and I can plug it and I can unplug it however I want. So in this video, we're not going to go very deep into actual like ported enclosure design and that kind of stuff. We can find these online everywhere, but we're going to have a look at the actual measurements. One thing that I want to point out is the subwoofers that can work in ported and sealed, or the ones that can do like only one or the other. So this is Alpine Status HDZ1110, and most subwoofers, especially from the big brands, they will be kind of optimized to work both in ported and in sealed enclosures. And the main parameter, it's not the only one, but the main one that determines where it would be optimal is the QTS of the driver. So this one has, I think, like most Alpine subwoofers, 0.4, 0.45 or something like that. If you have a QTS between like 0.4 and 0.5, those subwoofers will work in both, in sealed and ported, and hence that's why I can do this experiment with this subwoofer. Now, if you have a QTS of lower than 0.4, like 0.3, 0.25, 0.2, even lower than that, those will work only in ported, and they're not gonna perform good in sealed at all. So probably everybody knows like the main characteristics of ported enclosure is that you have a boost close to tuning frequency from the port compared to a sealed enclosure. Now, obviously, there's benefits and drawbacks to both enclosures. So, for example, with ported, we have more output over there. After that, like below the FS, the response drops more sharply compared to a sealed enclosure. And I will try to show you why that is. I'm not sure if my experiment is going to go through, but we're going to see. Now, this specific enclosure is a little bit too big for this subwoofer. This subwoofer calls for about like 1 to 1.5 cubic feet. This is close to 2.5 cubic feet before displacement, like 2.2, 2.3 after the displacement. So it is oversized for both sealed and ported. And the tuning frequency of this port is super low. So you can see I use it in home together with my bookshelves because I wanted to have it more like for home theater and less for music. So it is tuned to 25 hertz. Now, yes, this is not optimal and is way too low. However, I'm planning to replace the subwoofer with something a bit, maybe a 12-inch home theater sub that can be tuned as low like Dayton Ultimax or something like that. So the tuning frequency is super, super low. And we will see that from the impedance graphs. So now I'm gonna put it together because I just want to show you how it looks like. I'm gonna take some SPL graphs, I'm gonna take it to the car, I'm gonna make some more SPL graphs, and then when I'm gonna have all the data and everything, we're gonna jump into the laptop and I'm gonna show you all the differences between sealed and ported. As always, we're gonna start with the impedance graphs. So the impedance, you saw it probably a lot of times. So this is the driver itself in free air taken out of the box. And we see just a regular normal impedance, one single peak at a frequency of 34 hertz. So that's FS of the subwoofer. And we have quite high LE because it's rising in the top, but it's expected for a subwoofer. And like here, no major like deviations or anything. Sealed enclosure looks extremely similar. The only thing is that your resonant frequency increases depending on the size of the enclosure. The smaller the enclosure, the more this peak is gonna go to the right side of the higher frequencies. And in extremely small enclosures, this subwoofer could be like peaking at 50 hertz or so. However, as I mentioned, this one is in an oversized sealed enclosure, and we have FB, which is the resonant frequency of the actual box enclosure, is 37, which is extremely close to the FS, and that means that in this sealed enclosure, the subwoofer behaves almost as if in free air or infinite baffle. So you could have an infinite baffle similar performance from a box as long as the box is big enough, and you would have the impedance graph for both free air and the box very, very similar or ideally the same. Now I'm going to remove this one, and here we have the ported enclosure. So ported enclosure will have two peaks, 1 and 2, and the dip in between those peaks, I'm going to remove this one, is your tuning frequency. So the best way to find out what your box is tuned to, just make an impedance sweep and see where this dip is. So this dip is at about 24, 25 hertz. As I said, it is super low and it is too low for this driver. We can see this because this dip is not symmetrical. You can see it goes down like this, and this one is much steeper, and these two peaks are not the same height. When you're designing a ported enclosure, ideally you would want this valley to be symmetrical and these peaks to be at the same height. And when you see something like this, you can tell that the box is not optimal for this driver. Now, I did this on purpose just to show you how you can mess up. And because I'm planning to buy another subwoofer for this box, which is a Sony Explode, you know, those pentagons or whatever they're called, the red ones or silver ones. So I'm gonna buy one of those and I'm gonna stick it in because for that subwoofer, because that subwoofer has an FS of like 22 something here, so that one in a big enclosure with tuned very low, it benefits from it, but this one is not ideal. But as I mentioned, 25 hertz is our tuning frequency. So what we can expect is that we're going to have a bump in frequency response at about 25 hertz. So let's have a look at some frequency response measurements. This is a sweep in a room. So in my room from, I don't know, maybe like 8 or 10 feet away, this is just totally random. I just had a subwoofer in the very corner of the room and I just took a measurement from the sofa. And you can see it is speaking at 50 hertz. So this is sealed when the port is closed. And we can see all of this nonsense is just reflections because I didn't gate this measurement because I wanted to see all the way down to like 10 hertz or so. Now, exactly the same enclosure, if I remove that stuffed toy from the port, I'm gonna give us this. So this you can see that at higher frequencies is exactly the same, and we're gaining a lot, and we're gaining the most here at 25 hertz. So we're gaining 12 dB. Now, as I mentioned, Ported enclosures, this is exactly what you have. And the roll-off is not really visible here. We're going to see at the measurements in the car, you will be able to see it a bit better. However, in this one, I want to show you something very interesting. And this is something to do with the sound quality of ported versus sealed enclosures. Now, yes, we have more output at the lower end, and everything else looks kind of the same. However, we can see a difference around here, which is about 230, 240 hertz. Now, obviously, yes, the subwoofer is not going to play that because it will be crossed at what, 60, 70, and all of this is going to be just in the noise. However, I want to point out this discrepancy because it means something. You see this a little bit more level. So what I want to show you is the distortion of sealed versus ported. So this is a sealed distortion, and here we can see that everything is kind of flat at 1%. I didn't measure the level, so it doesn't really matter because the important thing is that the level is the same between the ported and sealed. But for sealed, we can see 1%, probably it's just noise, but yeah. And we have some distortion here at 150. Now, question why it is? It could be rattles from the room, that kind of stuff. If we're going to have a look at the ported distortion, we have a slightly different picture. We have an increase of distortion up to 5% at 24, 25 hertz, which is the tuning frequency of this box. So this is the distortion that is coming from the port, or otherwise called port chuffing, because for my box size and the subwoofer, that port is a little bit too small, and on higher levels you can hear chuffing, and this is exactly what is shown in the distortion, 5%. Another thing is this one at 230 hertz. We have distortion at 230 hertz. Now why? Let's have a look at this. I didn't measure the port and the cone by themselves near field. So the blue line is the port. Basically, you stick the microphone literally inside the port, and the cone is literally near field a few millimeters from the cone. So from this, we can see that the cone is playing, if I'm going to remove this, everything like down to 40 or so, and then it kind of goes down because all the sound below that is being produced by the port. You can see the port is overtaking and it peaks at the tuning frequency, which is 25 hertz, and then it goes down. So in ported enclosure, the sound output, well, obviously, as you know, is determined by the higher frequencies by the cone and the lower frequencies by the port. However, if we have a look at the cone only, you can see that here we have a massive peak of energy. So how can a port play 220, 230 hertz? This is port resonance. Every port will have a resonant frequency, not only like lengthwise, but due to like other dimensions of the port. And this is, you can calculate it. There's special programs that can calculate the resonant frequency of the port and will tell you where you're gonna have problems. And now, if we overlay this ported response with only the port, we can see that this little peak that arises, this is the difference between ported and sealed, this little peak is caused by the port itself. So it's playing through the port. Now, what can you do about it? In cars, it's not really important because when you're going to cross that subwoofer at 40, 50, 60, and it's going to be in the back in the boot, you won't be able to hear this. This is a problem for home audio when you have full range drivers and you have maybe like 8-inch mid-bass or subwoofer drivers and you have port aimed towards yourself, and this can color the sound of your like mid-ranges and stuff. So what people do, they stuff boxes and they try to fix the resonance of the port. And that's why stuffing of like a ported enclosure is more important for home audio, for towers, and not for a car. In a car, you're not going to hear that because it's going to be, as I mentioned, like in the back, behind the seats. So all of these higher frequencies, like 200 hertz, you won't be able to hear that. But in a home, that is a problem. Now, if we would have a look at the distortion of cone and port. So this is the cone distortion. Again, the level doesn't really matter, but we're looking for like trends. And we can see that at about 25 5 again. We have a little peak in the cone distortion, probably because the cone is kind of fighting with the port, because we know that at the tuning frequency of the box, the cone is almost standing still, so it's not moving that much. So this distortion is not due to the X max, you know. And again, the level is very similar to the rest of the level, so it's fine. However, if we have a look at the port near field, we have a totally different picture. We have massive distortion at 24-25 hertz at the tuning frequency. And in this case, this was low level, but we can see that the port distortion is 20%. And this translates into far field when we have 5%. Some people say that ported enclosures are cleaner than sealed because at the tuning frequency, the cone is not moving and the port is producing everything. But ports are extremely dirty. Now, yes, my port is not perfect. It could be more rounded, it could be bigger, but you would still have the same issue with any kind of port. So just imagine when you have like a 4th order or 6th order bandpass enclosure, this issue is, yeah, it is an issue. And again, much higher distortion at 220 to 30, where we have this port resonance. So that's in home. Now let's have a look in car, because I did exactly the same in a car. This is sealed in a car, and we have a response like this. So look, now I'm going to prove it to you that the top end depends on the location and not necessarily on the subwoofer. This is sealed in a room. So in a room, you can see that it plays here. These are reflections, but it still plays to 250. Even if we're going to take this out, we can say that this subwoofer in a room plays up to 400. If you're going to apply some smoothing, these are going to disappear just like that. So we can see it plays up to close to 500, a subwoofer. And in a car, it drops down below 50. Why? Because of the location. It's not the subwoofer. And it's exactly the same with infinite baffle subwoofers. When people say infinite baffle subwoofers, like themselves, the subwoofers themselves don't play high. They do play high, it's just the cabin, the car doesn't let it to play high. And that's why it rolls off below 50. But sealed enclosure, oversized sealed enclosure, performs in a car as infinite baffle, and I do have a solid flat response all the way down to 10 hertz. Now, exactly the same location, exactly the same box. If I'm removing the stuffed toy from the port, this is ported, and we have plus 12 dB at the tuning frequency of 25 hertz, and then everything is rolling down. So in a car, it's much easier to see the roll-off difference, where you have sealed going, and then rolls off, and ported below the tuning frequency, it just drops down. So if you're going to watch this video to the very end, I made some video clips where I'm demonstrating the port in phase and out of phase, and then you're going to understand why playing out of phase like 20 or 15 hertz, you have this dropping level, basically because the port is out of phase with the cone and they're canceling each other. But with a sealed, that's not happening. That's why sealed, it extends and it plays all the way. Now, the important thing is the top end. If we have a look above 50, there is no difference. Yes, we see this. We can see this peak at 230, 240, which is the port resonance. It does go through. However, if you're going to put a crossover like a low pass, this is going to go away. But the difference is there. So yes, playing the subwoofer full range, you can hear the port resonant frequency. It does show up even in the measurements. However, everything above 50 is exactly the same. So the top end extension does not depend if the box is sealed or ported, because the top end is being played by the cone, and the cone doesn't care at these frequencies if it's ported or sealed. Playing subwoofer at like 60 hertz, even in ported enclosure, it behaves as if it's being in sealed. So it doesn't matter. What matters is the low end. Now we can see this little dip at about 30 hertz. This could be a car issue, or it could be my infinite baffle subwoofer, because I have the FS is something closer, so it could be acting as a passive radiator and sucking out a little bit of energy. But yeah, you see I'm getting 12 dB at 24 hertz. Now, some people say, as I mentioned before, that ported enclosures are only for SPL and sealed only for SQ. Let me show you something else. I just added a target for my subwoofer if it would be crossed at 45 Hertz. This is my target. Now look at these graphs and tell me which response the target matches better. Does it match better the ported enclosure, or does it match better the sealed enclosure? Yeah, I think you guessed it right. With the sealed enclosure, if I would want extension down to 30 Hertz, what I would need to do, I would need to drop the response something like this, and then basically tune all of this down. That's why I always say with a sealed enclosure, use one EQ band at 50 Hertz and pull it down by 10 dB. So yes, however, with ported, the same box, same driver, everything is the same. I can do this, apply only a low pass just to remove this top end, and everything is basically matching all the way down to 21 Hertz, down to 22, with very, very little EQ. Maybe even with no EQ, it would sound very, very nice. So ported for SPL and sealed for SQ? No. And the thing is, I never understood this. It's like, why? If you design your ported enclosure according to what you need for it to match your target better, if I would have this enclosure tuned a bit higher, like at 30 Hertz, I would have this area covered with a little peak and a bit less energy here, and it would match my target perfect. However, sealed, it doesn't do that. Not even close. So no, you can use ported for SQ. And people are talking about group delay and everything. Just use normal subwoofers. Don't use like 5 kilowatt SPL subs for that. If you use a normal subwoofer, if you design an enclosure properly, you will have extremely, extremely good results. Now, let's talk about in-phase and out-of-phase slow motion videos. Hello. Okay, so while my phone is booting up after powering down, I'm just going to show you what I have here. So this, I saw it on YouTube. Somebody else did it in a pro audio world. They had slightly different sub where they had the port in front of it. And since mine's on the side, this is the weird angle. I need these LED lights because the cone is very dark, and for slow-mo video, you need a lot of light to see it properly. So with this, we're going to see the cone and the port phase and how are they becoming out of phase at a certain frequency. So I will play different tones like 15 Hertz, 20 Hertz, 25, 35, 40, and then we'll see how the port is moving one way and the cone is moving the other way. Now I have to do this on my Samsung phone, which is the old one, just because it has a super slow-mo function. I don't know how many, I think it's like 120 FPS or something, but it's very, very cool. So let me do some videos and then we're gonna see how it looks like. I did manage to capture some very, very cool shots. So what I did, I played 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and 35 Hertz. Now 25 Hertz is the tuning frequency, 30 and 35 is above, and 20, 15, and 10 is below. So we're going to see how the cone behaves in relation to the port and the port in relation to the cone. First, let's have a look at 35 Hertz. So what we can see is when the cone is moving out, at the same time, we have this leaflet going out as well. We can see they're moving in phase. Now, what we can see from this is that the cone is moving much more compared to the port. The cone is doing the most of the work and port is moving just a little bit. If we go down to 30 Hertz, the cone is moving a little bit less and the port is moving more because this leaflet is moving side to side much more in amplitude. However, they're still in phase because when the cone moves out, leaflet goes out as well. Now, let's go down to 25 Hertz. This is the tuning frequency. And at tuning frequency, we see that the cone is barely moving, just a few millimeters, and the port, this leaflet, is going crazy. But they're still in phase because when the cone moves out, the leaflet goes out as well. Now, the interesting part is below that. This is 20. So 20, we can see that the port is going crazy and the cone is moving much more compared to what it was moving while it was 25. However, now we can see that the port and the cone, they're out of phase. because you can see it looks like one is lagging a little bit behind the other. And what is happening below that is that they are canceling each other out just a little bit. But the port is doing a lot of work and the cone is doing a lot of work as well. Now, if we're gonna go lower to 15 hertz, we can see that the cone is moving much more. It moves as if it would be playing like 30 hertz. However, the port is playing very, very loud as well because the leaflet is moving a lot. And that energy is not going anywhere because the port is canceling the cone and the cone is canceling the port. Both of them are moving like crazy, but there is no sound because at 15 hertz, if you saw, there is a massive drop in frequency. And this is at 10. This is an extreme example where the cone is moving a lot, almost like up to X max. The port is moving a lot as well. However, there is absolutely no sound produced because, again, everything is canceling each other. So that's all what I wanted to show you today. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.